Good morning, guys. Happy Wednesday. I got coffee brewing, ready to go. So let's kind of review about the video yesterday that is on Schoology, and let's kind of dive in then what you're going to be doing today. So the first thing we're going to do, like always, is pull up the slideshow, and I realized yesterday, after a few of you requested access to this, that it was restricted. So I did allow access to this now, thank goodness. I'm going to open this up on a bigger screen so we can see it. All right, so why don't you guys pull up this tab as well? Go ahead and pause this video so you guys can pull that up. Okay, so yesterday we kind of talked about a brain dump and how we need to take all of our ideas in our head about a person. Well, we made a list of people that we interact with, and maybe it doesn't have to be somebody we interact with every day. Maybe it's just like once or twice a year, or maybe it was just once that we interacted with them, but we have a strong memory attached to an event with them, right? So we made a large list of people. Elementary teachers, you could list all of your possible elementary teachers that you know, all of your junior high teachers that you know, coaches, music teachers, if you do dance or, I don't know, something that's not offered through school, hockey, karate, any coach or private instructor. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents. Maybe you have an older sibling who's at least 10 years older, and you made a huge list on a scratch piece of paper or a notebook. Then what you did was you were supposed to think, okay, let's maybe narrow it down to like 5 people with a memory that I know I have with them. And it doesn't have to be a significant memory. It doesn't have to be something super big. I brought up the fact that my grandma, when she was alive, I would always bring her a fish fillet from McDonald's and a sundae and a small fry, her favorite. And so sometimes I would just go to her house and we would catch up. And it wasn't like a weekly thing. It was kind of whenever I was able to thing. And that was my memory. And it wasn't very, like, that's not a huge event in my life. But what came out of that memory or event was a conversation with my grandma that I'll probably never forget. Okay. And especially because she passed soon after that, it's a conversation that I remember. And what I remember about this was that I'm going to go down to the questions here. The memory that I had with grandma was that as we were eating, I came over there because I was having a really tough day and I didn't really want to talk to my mom or dad. And I lived out of the house. I was in my own apartment with a friend, but I just didn't feel like mom or dad was the person I wanted to talk to. And I talked to my grandma about how I was having a really rough teaching year. And I wasn't sure if this is what I wanted to do, and how I felt kind of like, is this my future? Is this my purpose here? I'm not sure. And I had a lot of like tears, and grandma was very reassuring, and she gave me a lot of words of the wiser, one of our signposts, right? And so that's why this memory was so significant. It wasn't about the McDonald's, it was about this conversation I had with grandma. So we brainstormed that, and then we went to our graphic organizer and added that in. So I'm going to hop on back to Schoology here, go back to week 11. And if you go back to the graphic organizer, yours is right here and it's blank. That's what you would fill out, but I'm just going to use mine that's already filled out as a model. So we are focused on the question, what unexpected event shows how a person can influence someone from a different generation? In this case, it was my grandma influencing me. And we're going to be writing a narrative about this. So you were supposed to fill in this box. So you would put in your person of an older generation, help to influence, put your name here, and how. I wouldn't put, they taught me that eating McDonald's is okay every once in a while. That's not it, right? That's the thing that we did. But the life lesson that I learned was that my grandma reassured me that, like, Vanessa, sometimes you try and be a perfectionist and you're never going to attain that, and you're going to fail sometimes, and it's okay. And so that's really the lesson that she taught me, the life lesson. Then what you needed to do is you needed to put in the characters in your story. If you think back to your event, who are the people that were in that event? And for me, it was just me and my grandma. And so what you're supposed to do is put in some traits to describe them, 2 or 3. And I have a little trait link here if you need some words. I struggle with coming up with adjectives sometimes. Think back to the memory then. What were some details that you remember? I remember what my grandma's kitchen looked like, kind of what she was wearing. She did have a stroke, so she had like a sling on her arm. And if you know, when someone has a stroke, sometimes they're paralyzed. So her lip was kind of sagging, and her speech is kind of slurred, almost as if she was drunk, because that's what happens when you have a stroke. Is you talk kind of like this. And then same thing for yourself. Kind of what did you look like? What did you notice? But then comes the hard part, the dialogue. I don't remember word for word what my grandma had said to me that day. So dialogue is where you kind of have the creative freedom to make up what was said in the best way that you remember. I'm not saying to go crazy making elaborate extraneous details that didn't happen. We want to keep it real or make it sound like the person. And then today, we're going to move on. So, what is the conflict in the story? And in this case, it was I felt like I didn't want to be a teacher anymore. I felt overwhelmed and stressed. And so, in this case, the conflict was with me. It was my internal conflict, meaning it came from inside me. Your story might have an external conflict where it's not you the one with the conflict, it might be the other person. So, if I wrote about my aunt, she is battling breast cancer. And so it might be that the external problem or the external conflict is with my aunt's health, right? And it's not my conflict, but it's my aunt's conflict, and I'm concerned about her. So you're going to put in one sentence what the conflict is, and then we're going to kind of move on. What are the sequence of events going on? And trying to split up your memory into 5 different sections, if that makes sense. So for me, if I think back to that day, I was leaving school to get in my car. It was raining. I started driving away with tears in my eyes. A lot of students were like, "Bye, Miss Benitez." They couldn't see that I was crying, so I'm like trying to fake it. Then I drove through McDonald's to get us our meal. And then I drove to grandma's. So it's very like, here, first I did this, then I did this, then I did this. It's very sequential. Then we sat at her table and I talked with her. Okay. The conclusion is going to be for everyone the reflection about what your person taught you. So, reflection in this case about how grandma helped me get through my tough day. My introduction, I chose to do background about grandma. If you're not sure yet, I'm going to come back to the introduction. So I at least want you to put in your memory and split it into 5 parts, as well as your conclusion, which for everyone will be a reflection about your person. If you want to, you can leave your introduction blank for right now. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is add some notice and notes into our story, right? So we haven't built our story yet. We're just kind of brainstorming. And if I go back to today on the weekly slideshow, okay, we're thinking about engaging the reader with introducing our characters, putting things in an event sequence, right? Which I just kind of talked about. So I'm going to talk about the rubric. The conflict I already talked about. It could be person versus self, which in this case, that was me. It could be person versus person. Maybe you have 2 people arguing. It could be a person versus an outside force that they can't control, right? Cancer, a tornado, something that's uncontrollable. And then the orders of events, right? We just talked about that. So before I go on to talking about adding some signpost in, which is your last task on your graphic organizer today, I do want to talk about the rubric. So I'm just going to look at a 4. And when you type this story out, you're going to make sure that the introduction is engaging, the conclusion is a reflection, and these events are told in logical order. It doesn't mean you have to start with the beginning of the story, middle, and then go to the end. You could start in the middle of the story, flash back to the beginning, and go to the end, but it just needs to make sense. Okay. Under narrative writing, this is about how stylistic and creative you are. You're using dialogue. You're going to have a lot of descriptive words, weighted words in there, which I'll show you how to add in. You're also going to have at least 3 signposts, which I'm about to show you next. and some sensory detail. That just means what you learned in elementary: hearing, smelling, taste, touch, sound. Okay. And grammar. Are we capitalizing new sentences and names? Are we, oh, I got a fly on my computer. Are we putting periods at the end of sentences? If it's dialogue, people talking, are we putting that in quotation marks? Okay. So let's move on to adding some signpost into our story that we haven't yet really drafted yet. So you want to be thinking before you even start writing your story. Signpost, I'm going to briefly go through the 6 type of signposts. So the first one is words of the wiser. This is when an older person is giving a younger person wisdom. This is probably your dialogue that you put in your graphic organizer for your older person. It's probably what they said to you, right? So if I go back here, I kind of made this up. It's kind of what Grandma said. Don't stop caring, but stop caring about everyone else's cares and worries. You can't help everyone. They have to want to help themselves, and you can't carry that all on yourself. Do what you can and forget the rest. Notice how I kind of put it, how my grandma talks. That's okay. So if someone is saying something in some type of accent, or maybe they have a word or two in there that's maybe naughty, but that's how they talk, you have my permission to put it in there. Now, I'm not saying you need to swear in your story. That's not what I'm encouraging. I'm just saying to put it into the writing so it sounds like them. So, for instance, if they're like, my dad says wash instead of wash. Did you wash the dishes? So I would probably spell it differently, right? Or gonna instead of going to. So you want to sound like your person. But Words of the Wiser is just a life lesson that they gave you. Memory moment. This is just any sentence that starts with a flashback, like I remember when, or one day in 6th grade, or last year, or I remember when I was 6, and that might be how you start your flashback. And so I said one time, the time I'm writing about, was when Grandma and I both had a day that was a pain in the you-know-what. Right? So I'm just starting little bits of my writing. I don't know how the story is going to be put together yet, but I'm just starting with adding these in. Adding an aha moment. This is when somewhere in your story where you feel like, oh, I finally realized something. It could be I realized the lesson they were teaching me. It could be I realized that I forgot something in the car. It could be I realized and finally understood something that I never understood before. And you might start with a phrase like, it was then that I knew, or it was apparent that, or I suddenly realized, okay? And for me, it was, I didn't realize until that moment that I was really carrying the emotional baggage of all my students every day. And that's why I was having a really tough school year. The 4th type of signpost is a contrast contradiction. This is where a character does something that we don't expect them to do, right? So I decided to make a sentence where I was thinking back what happened that day. Usually my classroom is very organized, everything's labeled, and I was having such a rough day. I left my usually organized room totally unkempt, meaning totally messy. And usually I take my backpack home with my laptop, but instead I left without it, and I only took my car keys and my phone. That's not like me, and so you know something's probably up, right? So something that I usually wouldn't do, and that's what happened in this story. Adding in again and again. All right, so this is where a phrase or a word or a name is repeated over and over. And so when I was providing background about my grandma, I really wanted to show that, like, since she had her stroke, she used to be really independent and now she's dependent on people and she hates that. So I said she couldn't cook her own dinner. She couldn't make her own bed. She couldn't get dressed on her own. She couldn't bear anyone helping her that much. So the phrase she couldn't, that's repeated over and over. And not just because I needed and again, I really wanted to emphasize that, like, my grandma hates how she has to depend on people now because she used to be such an independent woman and she never accepted any help from anyone. She was very stubborn. And I'm sure she's looking down from me on heaven saying, yep, you got it. Okay, adding a TQ. This is the last type of signpost. This is a tough question. So you need to a tough question would be in italics because it's something that's not necessarily being said aloud. It's probably being said in your head or asked in your head. Why do I feel like a failure? Why does teaching feel so hard? Why can't I let go of my stress? And they don't have to be why questions. It could be how or what questions, or who, what, where, when, why. Okay. But I had and this could also count as an again and again, right? Because it's why. But these are thoughts that I had in my head when I was driving to grandma's because I was having a rough time. Okay. So you just need to pick 3 out of the 6. I actually put all 6 in, and you are going to fill those in right here. But again, you only need to fill in 3. So if you want to do a tough question, an aha moment, and words of the wiser, or contrast, contradiction, again and again, and memory moment. Okay, so pick 3 and put those in there. The last thing I want you to do is just read through my draft. I'm not going to read the whole thing on this video, okay, because the video is long enough that you're listening to. But I want you to read through my narrative draft, and just to see how I wrote this, because tomorrow you are going to start drafting this out below your graphic organizer. Okay, so stay tuned for the next video tomorrow, but make sure you are working on this because this has to be finished by Friday. All right, let's get to work, people. You got it.